Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Lisa Roe. Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad you are, and I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
Oh my goodness. So I come from a family of writers and artists, and we were sort of hippies in the 70s. And my dad wrote novels. He had a job, but he wrote novels. My mom was a potter. We were always making something, or I was very into making puppets and writing plays and putting on plays and writing little short stories. So it was sort of, if you didn't write, you got kicked out of the family. But so that was a little way to start it. But then as I got older and I wanted to be cooler, I kind of left the whole creative aspect. I was too interested in hanging around downtown and being cool. And it wasn't until I went to college where I studied advertising, where I ended up being working in advertising for 14 years. And I was a creative director and a copywriter. So I did a lot of writing through that. And then again, became a mom, kind of walked away from it, did all the mom things. And I used to tell my kids stories all the time. I didn't write them down, which is too bad because I have a terrible short-term memory. So I would tell them this fantastic story, and then I would forget the details of it, so I couldn't write it down. But I did eventually start writing my own stories when my kids were about in middle school, when I had a little bit of time where they were off at school and doing their own activities. And that's really how I started. I started writing short stories and then sort of bumbling into novels and continuing with novels, and here we are. So that's the version.
I
Yeah.
love that. And so what I'm hearing is a few things. So when you're copywriting, you're creating marketing, advertising, language pieces, essentially. There's an element of storytelling that's happening with that. There's an element of creative writing. It's not really technical writing in the context of like journalism writing. So I'm hearing that kind of help that creative spark to continue, and growing that, really, because if I'm understanding correctly, your copywriting probably would have been smaller pieces, relatively speaking, and then short stories were a little bit bigger pieces, and then moving your way into
Working my
novels.
way out. Exactly. Yeah. So interestingly, I think advertising really helps with the way I currently write today, the voice that I write with, because one of the most important aspects of creative advertising writing is that you've got 30 seconds to do it, or 60 seconds back in the day, or something like that. And so you really, you got to get it out, and you got to get it out fast, and you have a story to tell in a very short period of time. So it got me to learn how to go from start to finish quickly. Another thing that I think really helped me in advertising is that I wrote a lot of radio commercials, and they're all dialogue. So I have a lot of experience with writing dialogue. It's not like screenwriting where, you really have these in-depth conversations, but I do feel like it helped me get kind of my dialogue, going. And yeah, so it's funny because I do think that being an advertising copywriter is essential for writing quick, fast telling stories, which I hope mine is. Everybody will have to read it and find out, see what you think.
Yeah, but I would also imagine that helps you with writing the blurbs. Like when you're writing the back, it's like the abstract, if you will, or the book blurb. I mean, it is a form of not just giving the potential reader, the chance to kind of get a feel for the story, but it's also a hook for the story to say, you want to read more. So it's not just, here is the basic premise of this book. It's, let me tell you some juicy nuggets or give you some intrigue to want to pick it up and read. So I would imagine your background really lended itself to help with that.
Right. Well, it's interesting because my publisher found out that I was an advertising copywriter, and she used to come to me once in a while. Can you write these log lines? Can you work on your Amazon page and let me know what you think of it? Because yeah, I can write a one sentence, dot dot dot. Here's where, this is the story you want to read. So maybe that wasn't so good because I ended up doing a little extra work. But it's also helped me in marketing my own book. I do have a traditional publisher, and they did market my book for me, but every author needs to do their own work. They're no matter who you are, although I guess Stephen King doesn't. But, so it has given me, I make little ads for my own book, and I like I was telling you earlier before we went on air that I do the graphics for this great organization called the Bookish Road Trip, which is a group of women writers, and we all sort of work together to promote each other's books. But we have about 5,000 reader members now, and I do all their graphics. So it's kind of, that goes into my advertising background as well, because I do make them, sort of like little mini ads sometimes. So I have an opportunity to take my old background and bring it to my present day book writing.
Oh, I love that. And what I am hearing too is that, you know, sometimes we might not realize the little nuggets or the divine breadcrumbs, as I like to think of them, because if every person can look into what they've done before and say, can I connect these dots? Are there some things here that I find, that can work together or that I can build upon that can help me where I am? And sometimes you recognize you're doing that, and other times you might not, but until you go back and you look and realize, I wonder if I can leverage more of that skill set, or if I bring that in. So that's what I hear you doing, like really leveraging something that you did well and to bring it forward, and not just forward for yourself and your efforts, but it's also a way of supporting others, which I think is just a beautiful thing that you're doing.
Yeah, which I
So,
enjoy doing so much. Yeah.
yeah. Would you talk a little bit about, you said something earlier with that, which I thought was really cool. You mentioned how it helped you with dialogue.
Yes.
Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, even prior to being in advertising, when I was young, I told you I came from this artistic family, and my dad was a writer. And my dad gave me, here's your writing lesson. He said to me, write like people talk. And then that was the end of the lesson. But you know what? That stuck with me. And so when I went into advertising and I was doing these television commercials and radio commercials, I just kept thinking of that lesson. And so I started writing dialogue, how I thought people in the different circumstances would talk. And I guess it works. And, the dialogue came out naturally, and there was some humor in it because people are funny, and that's kind of the thing I like to put forward in my own work. So yeah, and I think that just became part of my DNA. Like, that's how I write. My voice, I didn't have to work hard for my voice to become that. It just sort of was just me coming forward again. And it's interesting because you said, you think back onto your old career. I never thought I'd have anything to do with advertising again. It was in the past. It was a very stressful business. I think I got about 16 stress-related illnesses from it. I was in, Manhattan in the 80s when things were crazy. I left to raise my kids, and I never thought I'd even look back over my shoulder. But then these things sort of kept coming back to me, and I started realizing that some of the writing I did, what came from my advertising background, and I didn't really think about it. And, now that I'm much more involved in book marketing, I am realizing, yes, this is stuff that is useful again. Things have changed. There were almost no computers. I'm not afraid to admit, when I was in advertising. And so things are very different than they were back then. But I used to use that typewriter. No, I'm kidding. I didn't. I'm pointing to an old antique typewriter behind me in case anybody can't see it. But yeah, so that was it. And I do think, you're back, no matter what you do for a living prior to coming to be a writer, there's so many interesting backgrounds that writers have. I know a lot of writers who were lawyers, and I think that really helps them in their plotting and their problem solving in a book. I know lawyers who are therapists, which, oh my God, how helpful is that? And, even out of the writing world, my daughter, I have a 25-year-old daughter who was a theater major, and she was a playwright and an actor, and she pivoted and became a therapist. And I just think, God, all those acting skills, you bring with you to be, your empathy that you learn in acting and things like that, you bring into a room with you when you're doing a session with somebody. So I just think a lot of that stuff, unless it was really traumatic, you really bring it forward with you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I would love for us to pivot a little bit and talk about, so we go from copywriting to short stories to, as you said, like fumbling your way through a novel. But let's talk about the writing process for a novel, because it is there's similar skill sets, obviously, and it is, and so the basic premise is that you're writing and you're storytelling just like you do in a short story, just like you do in copywriting. But the breadth is a little bit more, the depth is more. So would
Yeah.
you talk about what that was like writing the first book, writing the first novel?
Yeah. So the first book, I think I had a premise that I liked, and by the way, still like, and I had characters that I thought would find themselves along the way. And that is, there's nothing wrong with that, with characters, you discovering the characters along the way, and then maybe going back and rewriting the book so that the book fits around who these characters are. But because I was so new to it, I really had trouble finding these characters and figuring out how to create the world around them. So I think my characters were lacking where my story concept was good. And so I ended up moving forward away from that book and forward to something else, to another book. And what I discovered was when I switched, I had written the first book in third person. And when I switched to writing a first person present tense point of view, I was able to find my characters a lot faster. And because I think maybe it was because I was in their heads a lot and I was hearing, letting them talk a lot. And so that became a method for me to get my characters fully formed on the page. But it wasn't until I wrote my third or fourth, I've written a lot of books, my third or fourth book, where I really discovered that also what I might have been missing in the first book was a really successful story arc. And that was something I went back and learned, because that is something that you can learn and you should learn. And I actually went to a course called the Fifth Semester, which was at the time in person. It was a great in-person thing. You went to Chicago for 4 days and you worked with what they called a cohort, which was a group of you and 2 teachers. And you spent the whole weekend going over each other's work and reading to each other. And they had their own sort of story arc. It was basically a 3-act story arc, that you can find anywhere. But the way they laid it out made a lot of sense to me. And that actually helped me structure my books better. So from then on, I think I had a little bit more, my characters were up to speed a little bit better. My story arc was up to speed a little bit better. And so I was starting to write things that had a little bit more chance of going out into the world.
I really love how you've put that, where that the structure there, you could identify this is working in the book. I like the plot idea. This needs some more work where I need to firm up the structure, or I need to get to know the characters better. And then the problem solving that you're talking about, where let me try changing tenses. Let me try changing point of view. You don't even have to change the entire book to know if that's going to really work. You can change a scene or change a chapter, and then it should start to feel like, does this work for you or does it not? Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree.
Yeah.
I do agree. Because then, the fear of going back and changing everything, or going back and changing one thing is hard for people, or for me. And I am a plotter. There's the pantser and the plotter. And I think I have way too much anxiety to be a pantser, because I'm so afraid of just, running off and writing, and then writing myself into a corner, and then having to write myself out of it and start again, which is kind of, I guess, now that I think of it, how I wrote my first book. I always start my book with sort of trying to fill out this actually, I have this graphic that I received from the Fifth Semester, which is basically a graphic that is the 3-plot arc, but it has the inciting incident and a pinch point and the midpoint reversal and the darkest before the dawn and all that sort of stuff. And it helps me to plot out, even if it's loosely, plot out the book. So I feel like I kind of know where I'm going. And that helps a lot for me, but you still have to be open to go back, and things didn't work, characters didn't work. It helps if you have great beta readers, because sometimes you're so in it, you don't know where you are. And having a great beta reader or an editor is very helpful. And I'm very lucky at this stage in my life to have an agent who is also an editor. She's a former editor in her former life. So that's been very helpful, because she looks at something and she's like, this character's got to go. which happened to me recently, and I was devastated. And the character was on many, many pages. So it really had to go. But, I think that that's part of the process. We have to be in there for that part.
Okay, you've hit on a few things I would love for you to elaborate on. One of which is that so going back to dialogue again, I can imagine that the dialogue background that you described earlier and the thinking that you would do, like, well, how do they talk? I would imagine that when you shifted to first person, that element, that's something that you were like been trained essentially to do for so long between as a young person and then in your career. I bet that really helped developing those characters even more, because not only are they talking to you, their voice is becoming very clear in the dialogue. Would you? Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I think that what's also interesting in doing it, there's limitations on doing first person point of view and limitations on doing first person present point of view. That was a lot. In that the entire book is in your character's head. Nothing can happen that your character wasn't part of or didn't overhear or wasn't told to them. So, you have your limitations there. But for me, what's kind of interesting about it is that I can become the character. And I'm not saying that like my main character is me, my Ginny, who is the main character in my book, has probably, so I can be her while I'm writing her. But I act her out kind of, and I give her a lot of opportunities to say the things that I always wish I could say. So, my story, just very briefly, is about a woman who moves into a new town and struggles to fit in. And it's a sort of trying to break into existing social circles. And that does come from a real life experience of mine. I have moved around a lot in my life, and I'm a bit of an introvert, and it is hard for me to break into existing social circles. But Ginny got to do it in a way that I never could. So I had the opportunity of having the voice of a person who would say the things I wished I always said and never did. So that was a great experience for me. And then, I can be an 11-year-old girl, I can be a grumpy old man, but those things still, I think, that's my experience of writing dialogue, is I sort of am that person, and it comes out that way, which makes it sound a little weird, like I'm acting characters out in my room, and I'm not, but.
But even if so, if I could understand how that would be instrumental, because it would give you a feeling of body language even going into something, or the physicality that's happening in the space, like you acting it out. I could even see how that would be helpful. So but something else you mentioned, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about it, which was, so when your agent, who was an editor before, who then gives feedback and says, yeah, this character's got to go, and you're like, oh my gosh, really? Yeah. So although on the one hand you get it logically of, okay, the intent is to strengthen the story, that's why this person's telling me this. On the other hand, it's like really thinking through what that means. How did you go about working through that? Because it's not just as simple as saying, okay, we cut this chapter, or we cut this scene, because there were reasons why those scenes were put in there. So those scenes still have to be reconsidered, rewritten, not just without the character, but keeping in context with what you did want. So would you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So this is really interesting. It was time consuming for me, I'll say, but what I did when I started my rewrite was I actually read through the book and created sort of a backwards outline. So, and I'm actually staring at it because it's on a giant bulletin board on the wall over here still. It's still up. And so that way I could visually kind of see the story all at one time. And what I did was I highlighted the parts where this particular character was. So I knew that that was where things were going to have to change. Now, in this story, this character delivered what I feel was a lot of really important information. And none of it could go. Maybe there was a few things that she had done or said that maybe the story would still hold without her having done that. But there was some really important information, because I kind of used her as a device to get information. And that is exactly what my agent editor pointed out. She's like, you're using this character as a device. And I was like, well, can't I? Why can't I? But anyway, so I had to go back and in each situation find out how else my character was going to get this information. And in some cases, I gave it to a different character to give to her. In some cases, I used flashback for her to find out a different way. And in some cases where I could, I changed it so that, is this information really important? And if not 100%, go. If 100% important, give it to somebody else, create a whole nother scene. But that took going through the whole book. I mean, it took a really long time because it was, once you do something, I always feel like editing is like flipping the sheets when you're making a bed. You want to get those wrinkles out and you have to keep going down the bed. Everything is wrinkled until you get to the bottom where the wrinkles are gone. And I think going through the book and giving this character's information to other people changed other things. Who she was talking to, what time of day it was, what happened how did she feel when she received the information from a different character, not the one she thought. I have one scene I'm now remembering where this character called her and told her something that was in a newspaper. And so I had to have her go find the newspaper herself. But why was she finding the newspaper? Where she'd see a newspaper, in this day and age? It's a lot of, smoothing out the wrinkles in the sheet. And it took a while, but it was for the best. I 1000% trust my agent. She got me this far. And I really feel like if she thinks a character has to go or something has to change, I'm not going to argue with her. I'll do it,
Wow. But I love how the analogy that you used and the way that you talked about all of the ripple effects of what one comment can do to
my life for months.
but in the same breath, when you went back and so you've worked through all of those changes, and then you go back and reread to make sure, okay, A, did I get it? B, how does this feel now? What was that like? Could you really see a shift? And could you, at that point, kind of be able to look back and go, okay, excellent point. Now I get it. But when you're first creating it, it's hard to see.
Right. I mean, that's why you have to keep rereading, because you make these changes and you might have missed a wrinkle in the sheet. You might have not gotten something that is going to be completely out of left field. And so you just have to be patient and, read through again, keep doing it. And, that's what I did. I did a lot of read throughs. I tried to do them fresh. Because, when you're reading something over and over again, you start missing everything. You skip words, you don't see that words are gone, or you don't see that you changed a character's name, and then this page you didn't, which is not the most important stuff in the world, because an editor down the road will hopefully catch that stuff for you. But it is good to, if your deadline permits, to just, give yourself some space so that you can read this dang thing again. How many times can you read it? You hate it at the end. You've read it so many times. So,
Lisa, this has been a blast. Where can people connect with you? Where can you get the book, by the way?
Can I do
welcome to the neighborhood.
Welcome to the neighborhood. You can really buy it anywhere you get books, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, any online, Target, Walgreens, wherever. And you can also go to my website, lisaroe.com, because it's got all the buy buttons. So you can, hit a button and it'll link you right to whoever you want to buy it from. There's also an audiobook and an ebook. And you can connect with me on lisaroe.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at Lisa Roe Writes, or on Twitter at Lisa Roe Writes, or on Facebook at Lisa Roe Author. And I will comment, if you make a comment, I'll answer you back, and I'd love to see people there. And also, if I have any news coming up, I'm happy to share it with you'll see it online, and you'll get to know what's happening before my mother does.
Lisa, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer. It was great.